PPI is patient and public involvement in research. So historically, patients, of course, were participants in research. They agreed to take part in studies, but increasingly it's important that patients actually help to shape that research in terms of setting the agenda for what research is done and also being involved in the delivery so that the research remains focused on what's important to the patients rather than necessarily what's important to the researchers. It's obviously very important for us to include the whole population in research wherever we can. That's not just because it's important that we have as many people taking part in research as possible. But some patients who have traditionally been excluded from research may have even more benefit from new treatments and interventions. Up until fairly recently, most of the research done on hip fractures excluded patients with cognitive impairments because it was difficult to research in those groups of patients. But they represent between 25 and 40% of all patients with hip fractures, because if you have dementia, you're actually more likely to fall over and break your hip. So not including them in research was excluding a hugely important group of patients. So about 10 years ago, we set up a patient and public involvement group to actually specifically address that issue. One of the outcomes from the research was actually to highlight what a big problem delirium is. Patients who have operations, particularly after serious injuries, can often be very confused on the ward afterwards. So you forget where you are, you forget even who you are sometimes, you don't recognise your relatives. And that's incredibly frightening for the patients and really frightening for the relatives of the patients as well. Through the research, we were able to identify that not only are 25% of all patients with a hip fracture suffering some delirium, but we've now got some research running, testing new drugs to try and reduce the incidence of delirium afterwards.
My research is grounded on the idea of young people as change agents for better mental health. My most recent project is called Engajadamente, and that involves adolescents in Brazil. And we're working together to create a chat game tool. You talk to it as if you're talking to a friend, but it's a robot responding. A young person enters the experience and then they discover that their best friend in school has disappeared. Through that process of trying to find that character, you discover that character actually had been struggling with mental health, and you learn more about their story, and you learn skills to support your peers, and you learn skills to organize initiatives in your school. So we have a small committee of 5 young people who are the youth researchers in the team, and they've been working really closely with us. And together with them, we've interviewed young people all over Brazil to collect those stories that we're integrating into the tool.
One particular study that we worked on was on the topic of hepatitis C, so that's a bloodborne virus, and we worked with seldom heard groups, people experiencing homelessness, people who inject drugs, and often these individuals don't receive the full care for their hepatitis disease. And so this particular study looked at supporting these people with peer mentors, people of lived experience, to speak to these potential recruits, to encourage them to come forward, to then get tested and then discuss about how we can support them into care. Our recruitment was extremely successful because we went to the right places and we had the right approach. It wasn't nurses and doctors, it was people that looked like them, people that spoke like them. We then asked, how can we do this better? And what they suggested was, do you know what? If we could do the screening, if we could take the bloods, if we could accompany the clients to their appointments, it would make them feel safe. And so the follow-on project developed that model. And these lived experience peers became the people who delivered the service.
If you don't involve the patients in research, it's remarkably easy for researchers to forget what's the most important thing for the patients themselves. And the real change in research in the UK and increasingly around the world was actually making the patient's view central to what research we do and how that research is delivered.
It's really important that we represent all voices in research. There is no hard to reach group, it's just finding the right method and the right tools.
You need the input of a variety of people that reflects your population so that the service you're delivering is appropriate for every part of the population.
The research we do really has to represent the population it comes from, otherwise what are we doing it for?